September 18th, 2017 was the day I moved into the house I was renting on Kings Avenue in the city of Gladstone. It was a tiny one-bedroom place that was built by a 50-something-year-old man named Charlie Best back in the mid-1960s that he planned on being his retirement home. Back in the 60s, Gladstone was more of a small rural town than the city it is today, and you could pretty easily get away with living a decent distance from everyone else. I could imagine the guy was pretty pissed when Gladstone started expanding and all the property around him was getting bought up and houses were being built. He passed away sometime in 97 or 98 when the city had finished being turned into what it is today. My landlord at the time, Terry Bisking, bought the property when it was put up for auction a couple years later. He got it pretty cheap as everyone else's real estate agents were heavily advising against buying it, since you couldn't fit a family in it, and trying to rent it in an area that was made up of only families was impossible. This explained the low rent, since Terry told me it took 2 years to get his first tenant, and nobody stayed longer than 6 months. Although the house is pretty small, the property is quite large, mainly because 70% of the property is just yard. Apparently during his 20 years of retirement, Charlie spent most of it gardening. He had a ton of flowers, veggie patches, and even a couple of fruit trees. Unfortunately, most of the flora died during the 2 years between Charlie's passing and Terry's acquiring of the property, and he figured it would be cheaper to just uproot and get rid of all of it instead of trying to salvage what was left of it, so he paid a company to remove it all. This had apparently attracted the attention of one of Charlie's few friends, an older lady named Anne who moved to Gladstone only a few years after Charlie did. She was quite upset with the removal, which is understandable considering she was one of the few people who got to see it all grow. From what Terry told me, there was quite the back and forth between them, citing some final will and vow, or something to do with burial disturbance. I don't know, but the bottom line is, since there was no sufficient legal document that could stop Terry from removing the garden, he did, and replaced it with grass. You've probably already guessed that Terry isn't very respectful of property, and living there for a couple of months I learnt that the hard way. The only time anything in the house was repaired or replaced was if I did it myself, or I threatened to file a complaint with the state government. I'd never actually go through with it, since those take a month at the least for anything to get done. The only real upside to Terry's terrible management was that he viewed any upgrades or changes I made to the place as free labor, so I was able to make the place as comfortable as I could without breaking down the walls. Truth be told, living there wasn't that bad. I chose the place because of the low rent, since I was a broke, recently graduated nursing student. I was working most days and long hours at the St. Patrick's Hospital, so the only times I was ever home was to sleep, shower, wash my uniforms, and meal prep for the week. Occasionally I'd work late nights, and wouldn't have the energy to drive the 20 minutes back home, and I'd sleep in one of the on-site staff quarters, and sometimes go 2 or even 3 days without going home. I wouldn't say I really settled into the place and a comfortable schedule until about 5 months, so I'm not sure if it started before then. All I can say is I didn't notice it until that night. I just had a block of night shifts at work and was about to go into a block of mornings after a few days off, so I decided to go to bed early to try and change my sleep schedule to make getting up in the morning easier. I must have laid in bed staring up at the ceiling with small periods of closing my eyes for 2 hours, just trying to fight the urge to mindlessly scroll on my phone, or get out of my bed and do something. I went to look at my phone on my bedside table, when in the corner of my eye, I spotted a weird light. In the opposite corner of my room there's a pocket of space that stays completely pitch black, despite my eyes adjusting thanks to a little bit of moonlight that slips through my blinds. But in that corner of blackness were 2 tiny green dots of light, right next to each other. They weren't illuminating anything in that dark pocket, they were just existing in it. I sat there staring at it for a while, wondering if I had ever seen it before, and trying to figure out what was causing it. There were no lights on in my room, and certainly there couldn't have been a green light coming from outside. I don't know why, but looking at it made the hair on my neck stand up, and I felt like I couldn't look away. I turned on the lamp on my bedside table, and the dots, as well as that dark corner, went away, but would come back as soon as I turned it off. Trying to go to sleep was nearly impossible after I noticed the dots. Every time I opened my eyes, I would find myself staring at it for a minute or so. Eventually, I found the only way to get any proper sleep was just by sleeping with my face under the blanket to stop from looking at it. The first few nights I would nearly obsessively keep my attention on those dots for an hour, give or take, until I would settle into sleep. But after 2 weeks I found myself being able to crash without so more than a couple glimpses. After maybe another 6 weeks was when it decided to make its first move. I was lying in bed, like any regular night, the blanket pulled just a little over my head, when I started hearing the floorboards creak. It's an old house, so I usually don't pay any attention to those, but instead of the quick snapping sounds that usually come from a house settling, there was a slow arcing sound. It sounded like a footstep. I felt a small panic ripple through my body, and I could feel pins circulate through my arms. My eyes were wide open, despite taking in no light, and all I could do was try not to make any sounds from breathing and try my hardest to listen to anything happening in my room. After a few seconds, I heard the exact same creak come from the foot of my bed. I flung the sheet off me and looked around the room, but it was empty, except for that dark corner with the green dots. I reached over and flipped the switch on my lamp, but no light came on. I grabbed my phone and turned on the torch, the light making any dark patches and the dots disappear, and I started to calm down after seeing nothing in my room. I looked at the time, and it was close to 4 a.m., so I just decided to get out of bed and get ready for my morning shift. I spent most of my shift thinking about what I heard. After hours of working in a well-lit hospital full of people, I guess I got it into my head that the uneasiness from the dots was just making me hallucinate everything else. I heard during some of my classes while studying that sometimes if we think we're sick, we can end up becoming sick through placebo, and how placebos can affect all kinds of aspects of our lives. I figured this was just one of those moments where, because I was thinking too much about those damn dots, it just started manifesting in my hearing. I decided my previous debunk of their origins was wrong, and it actually was just an outside light poking through my blinds. They weren't amazing at keeping out light, since my room would be completely lit up by 6:30 in the morning, so after my shift I went out and bought blackout curtains, as well as a new light bulb. Like I said, Terry didn't care about changes to the house, so I didn't even bother calling him and asking permission to hang up the curtains. After I changed the curtains, I went to swap the bulb in my bedside lamp. Before I took the old bulb out, I decided to flip the switch. The light turned on. I tried to keep rational and tried to believe that that night there was just something blocking the connection that went away during then and now. I managed to calm myself down after reminding myself that this is the same bedside lamp that I've had since the start of my tenancy, and it's probably been here since Terry bought the place. I decided to change the light bulb anyway and get a new, better quality lamp when my next paycheck came through. That night I had been lying in bed, reading before going to sleep. When I eventually started feeling tired, I put my book in the side drawer and turned off my lamp, and the room went completely dark. No inside moonlight seeping in, no worry that I'd be rudely awoken by the early morning sun, and most importantly, no green dots. The blackout curtains worked fantastically well, better than advertised. I couldn't even see my own hands in front of my face, and the only way I could tell where anything in my room was thanks to my memory of my room based on where I was sitting and facing. I looked at the corner where the green dots used to be, and saw nothing. But instead of relief, I felt uneasy. I almost forgot that the whole reason I bought the curtains was to get rid of the dots, but I couldn't stop myself from looking for them. I continued scanning the room, but no matter where I moved my head, all I was surrounded by was the empty abyss. My eyes finally fell on where I believed my door used to be. I moved to lay down on my bed, when something, somewhere in the void, caught my attention. I propped myself up on my right elbow and looked to the foot of my bed. My body froze when at the end of my bed, or where I thought was the end of my bed, a little above my bed frame, my eyes met those green dots. I could feel my heartbeat speed up in my chest, and my breathing started to quicken, no matter how much I tried to control it. My eyes were completely fixated on the dots of light that refused to leave me alone. Before I could even attempt to move, the dots started to rise until they were standing much higher than they used to when they sat in the corner of my room. My heartbeat quickened still, beating harder as I could feel each sense in my body forcing as much information into me as possible. I could feel every inch of my body that was wrapped in bed sheets. I could feel the chill in my room that now smelt like burnt wood. I could feel my eyes widen desperately, trying to adjust to the dark, trying to take in some other light source, but my curtains put a stop to that. The only light I could see were those dots that started to slowly bob up and down. They were moving closer. I felt the blanket ripped from my bed, and it broke me out of my trance. But before I could start moving, I was gliding along the bed, being pulled by my leg by something I couldn't even feel. I rolled on my stomach and tried crawling along my bed, trying desperately to grab onto anything solid. The bed liner slid off quickly, and I found myself clawing at the bare mattress. I could feel the fabric of the mattress ripping, and the stuffing tangling through my fingers and underneath my fingernails as I took clumps of it with me with each movement. I screamed. I couldn't hear my voice echoing off the walls, it just sounded like it went on forever. When I eventually got to the top of my bed frame, I nearly put my hand straight through it. I grabbed onto the top of the frame and dragged myself towards the curtains. The wood frame was bending and started to crack under the strength of whatever was pulling me. I couldn't tell if there were any other sounds going on in the room. All I could hear was the jackhammer of my heart beat in my skull. I could feel the thing's presence moving up my body, encapsulating me like the fog of dry ice when its container is unsealed. When I reached the edge of the bed frame, I thrusted my hand out to where I still hoped the curtains to be, and I was met with a fistful of strong fabric. I felt the thing's presence leave me, and my momentum pulled me off my bed to the floor, and the weight of my body yanked the curtains from the railings. The room flooded with blinding moonlight, and I just laid on the ground and my head in my arms, hoping, praying that thing was gone. After a few seconds, I lifted my head up and saw the room was empty. Even that one dark corner in my room had nothing in it. I sat there crying for, I don't know, at least 10 minutes maybe. When I finally managed to compose myself, I turned on all the lights in the place. The lamp next to the bed worked again, and my phone was miraculously on. I decided I obviously wasn't sleeping in that house anymore, so I grabbed some clothes and spent the night in one of the hospital quarters. The next morning I called Terry and told him I wanted out of the lease. He of course reminded me I still had 4 months left, so I'd have to pay the remainder of my lease up front if I wanted to move out now. I knew it would remove most of my savings, but I had no strength to argue. Even in the hospital quarters I barely slept, and was too tired to even show I hated the idea of parting with the money. I only stayed at the hospital for a few days before moving in with my friend Logan and his fiancée. And after a few weeks of staying with them, I managed to find a new place to live. This time I went with a place that had roommates. I just wasn't comfortable with living on my own again yet. I got pretty lucky and managed to find a place only 10 minutes away from the hospital with 2 other guys living in it. 6 months of living in that place, I'd almost forgotten about Kings Avenue and was able to sleep without nightmares constantly yanking me from sleep. I was even going to try sleeping without the nightlight eventually. The lightless nights would have to wait, however, when on a Thursday, I got a text from Logan saying, "Isn't this where you lived?" with a link to an article attached. The web browser popped up, and I was immediately faced with a picture of my old place with the caption, "Murder on Kings Avenue." And it felt like my lungs were getting more and more fatigued, the more I kept reading. A little under a month after I moved out, a new resident had taken up the vacancy. They were a model tenant, paid bills on time, kept the place clean, and never received noise complaints. However, 2 weeks ago, after their workplace sent a welfare check to the house, they were found deceased in their bed. The cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation, but there were no signs of strangulation. The only signs of struggle was that all the bed sheets had been pulled off the bed. The most disturbing part, however, was the reason this had been ruled as a murder was because the eyes had been removed from the body after death. It was reported that it was a clean but difficult removal, like they had been plucked from the socket, like a splinter from flesh. The article went on to describe Terry's rental history, without giving any names of previous tenants, as well as the story of the original owner, Charlie Best. What year he purchased the land and built the house, the year he moved in, how long he stayed, and when he died. It was just a brief overview with very few details of his personal life and character, but next to the paragraph outlining his time in Gladstone was a photo of him looking somewhere in his 70s. It was then that I think I started piecing things together. I haven't revisited that article since then. I haven't had the heart to, ever since the fear that photo instilled in me. I couldn't look away from it for a few minutes there. I just kept staring at those piercing green eyes.